I think Dr. Charles has made the job a little easier. This is indeed a challenging part of this family communication, which is communication of error in the ICU to the patient and family. This morning, while having tea, I was discussing it with some of my friends, and I had a very mixed reaction from the 4 or 5 people who were standing there. One said it's simple, the other said it's the most difficult thing to do. So I asked, and as I go along, we'll sort of just try to see how one can a little more methodically, deal with this difficult area. To err is human. We all know that. We understand that. We commit mistakes in our lives. Many of them are major, like, marrying the wrong girl. But when it comes to another human being making a mistake, we are not as forgiving. We tend to, put the pointing finger of blame very quickly. We are less forgiving. We get angry. We get emotional. We do not understand how a mistake could be made when critical areas are involved. And that is the type of reaction which families will have when an error is made in the, in a critical area. And we need to understand, as my former speaker said, you need to understand where they're coming from. They're angry at the situation, may not necessarily be at the individual. But again, this can vary. You may have errors of, forgetfulness. You may have errors of actual negligence. You may have errors of ignorance. There may be errors where people have actually not been trained adequately for a particular problem. But if you look at the frequency of errors in the ICU, and if you look at the literature, people who have actually tried to study it, you find that they are quite common. If you look at this, medical errors cause an estimated 44,000 to 98,000 deaths each year in the US. This is a Institute of Medicine report in the NEJM in 2000. An interesting Israeli study where they found, when they looked at patients in the ICU for about 24 hours, at the number of tasks which were done for each patient, and they found that about on an average 178 tasks were required for each patient every day. And if you take even a low error rate of just 1%, which I'm sure in ICUs which are not that developed and not so protocol driven would be more than that, it still amounts to 2 errors per person per day, which is significant. These errors, of course, may or may not lead to an adverse event which can affect the outcome of the patient, but yet you must understand that you are working in a very, very complex environment where the amount of information that each individual is supposed to handle is enormous, and therefore errors are to be expected, and you can only make an attempt to every day try to prevent them. This is another study which shows that in an observational study, in 391 patients, they found that there were 120 adverse events in 79 patients, of which 13% were life-threatening or fatal, as well as 223 serious errors, which 11% were potentially life-threatening. Now, this is a study again from Western literature, and this is in fact a pretty high error rate if you look at it. I am not aware of studies in the Indian subcontinent where people have actually tried to look at the error rates in our ICU, but this is something to think about, and one needs to be fully aware that the potential for error in this area is enormous. What is an error? If you are planning an act which may be as simple as putting in a urinary catheter, but which is not completed as intended, that means you have, while putting it, created a false passage or caused bleeding, that is an error. Or if you have put in a Foley's catheter for a patient who has, terminal renal failure and actually is not making out any urine, that also might be an error. So you may have errors of both kinds, where a planned act is not completed as intended, or you may have a wrong plan of action for a particular problem. When an error results in injury to the patient, then it becomes an adverse event. Most errors do not translate into adverse events. Many of them are sort of therefore just swept under the carpet many a times. But you must realize that a significant percentage of errors do translate into adverse events. And as I said, you could have individual errors. So you could have an error of forgetfulness. It could be ignorance about a particular methodology or a procedure. It could be actual negligence. Or it could be a systemic error. It could be an error where a protocol is not being used or is absent. Or the person who's performing the task is improperly trained, which is often the case. There is faulty recruitment. You have taken a person who is actually just not fit for the critical care environment, and he cannot function in that properly. There is poor communication between the team, between the doctors and the nurses, between the nurses themselves, or even between nurses and the technicians or the orderlies who are working or helping you out. So you may have an intercostal tube which is linked to a water seal bag, and the orderly comes and just empties it out without caring about or without knowing about what should be done. So you may have, but how should we look at these errors? Perhaps it is important to understand that we need to get above the individual approach, treat errors more as systemic or systematic errors rather than individual errors. The point is not to find out who blundered. The point is to find out why he blundered. The error is not to be seen as a consequence. It is to be seen as a cause. You try to find out what is the cause of this error. Why did this person make this error? Any person who is working in a critical care environment would not like to commit an error. So to ask him why he committed the error, you are not to question his integrity, but you have to question as to why he was forced to commit that error. Was it because he had too much of work on his hands? Was he improperly trained? Did he try to shortcut the methodology? So those are the things to be looked at, and that is perhaps how we can learn more from these errors. Now, as far as the disclosure of error goes, are there any guidelines as to whether the errors should be disclosed, what type of errors should be disclosed? If you review the literature, you find that there are general statements, but there is no clear-cut guideline as to whether all the errors that are made should be disclosed, whether the errors which are only translating into adverse events should be disclosed, and the practice is also therefore very, very varied. You find that the American College of Physicians, the ethics manual reads, physicians should disclose to the patients information about procedural or judgment errors made in the course of care if such information is material to the patient's well-being. So they are obviously looking at adverse events. And as it also goes on to say that errors do not necessarily constitute improper, negligent or unethical behavior, but failure to disclose them may. This is important, because if there is an adverse event and you are not being honest to the family and the patient, then the withholding this information actually can be unethical or can be taken as unethical, and you can be taken to court for that and probably sued heavily. But if you are disclosing the information, then the chances are that you may not go to court, and that, even if a compensation has to be paid, it may be less. What is the situation about reporting of errors? Dr. Vincent, who is here as a part of this Congress, published this in 1998, where there was a questionnaire floated amongst 16 ICUs in Europe, and they found that only 25% were reporting giving complete information with significant gender, geographical and religious differences. As Charles just mentioned, that across countries and across regions, you find that the way information is taken and responded to, it differs. So you find that in Netherlands, the doctors are much more outcoming, in terms of giving out information, while in Greece, they are not that forthcoming with the information. Another report says that 56% respondents avoided the word error in the communication with the patient. That means they didn't want to mention the word error because that, reflected as incompetence in terms of the people who are working and reflected poorly on themselves. And the other important thing again is that the nature of the error, how grievous is the error, what was the injury caused, that also seems to have a bearing on whether the error is disclosed or not. For example, if a small medical error is made, overshot of insulin or something is done, there's a brief hypoglycemia, the patient doesn't realize it, the family doesn't realize it, almost certainly this is not going to be disclosed to the family that, certain thing like that happened. But if a chest tube is put in and a liter of blood, comes outside and it's obvious to each and everyone that, an error has been done, then definitely the physician may feel, impelled to talk about it and disclose it to the family. So this also seems to have an importance, that the degree of the error and how apparent it is to the patient and the family also has a bearing on disclosure. Now, impediments to disclosure of error are more or less obvious. There can be professional repercussions amongst your colleagues, there can be legal liability, there can be direct blame, there can be negative patient or family reaction. The person may feel humiliated. If he is a perfectionist, he may feel that he has let himself and his team down. There will be guilt, and there may be a lack of a safety forum. He may feel that he is unprotected and will not be defended properly. There is a lack of anonymity and lack of confidentiality is many times. So these may prevent a person from reporting the error, and therefore, as I said, that if you have a systemic sort of approach to it, which means that the team should believe that an error can be made, no individual is responsible, but it is the system which has to be improved, and therefore if that is the approach that the team has, then the chances are that people will be more outcoming in terms of if an error has been committed. What are the benefits of error disclosure? Definitely, if there is a team culture, then there's a chance that this will improve the patient safety in the future. Because if errors are openly discussed within the team and with the family, there is a very good chance that subsequently that error is less likely to be committed. You may have found it yourself that when you talk to the family openly and honestly about an error, if it has been committed, at once you feel that the burden has been taken off from your mind. The feeling of guilt which was there now is out in the open, and you can actually talk to the people that, okay, this is what happened. We are sorry that this has happened, but unfortunately that's the way it is. Despite our best efforts, this is the state of affairs, and therefore we will proceed from here on and try to make the best of it. So you may find actually, and there are studies to support that this may actually improve the patient-doctor relationship and trust. There may be a decrease in the lawsuits and the amount paid in compensation, and the staff and the institution is likely to be looked upon as honest and trustworthy, rather than trying to cheat or trying to get them out of a difficult situation by lying. And this has definitely been shown to decrease the future error rates and actually improve the outcomes. How would you prepare? An error has been made. What would you do? And some of this has been said in the previous lecture also. It is important that you prepare before you disclose the error, which will mean, one, try to find the cause, what happened, try to find out, and analyze how that error has occurred. What are the future changes you would like to do to prevent that recurrence? Because many families may accept that an error has been made, but they would like to see that this team which has committed that error is, ready to correct itself and prevent that error from occurring again with another patient or with his own patient. You may discuss with third parties the legal and the financial implications of the case before disclosing the error, so you have a clear idea as to what you are getting into. Prepare the meeting place, time, and the people attending. It's important that at the time of the meeting, you have a very clear idea who all are going to attend. It's important to have some of your own staff, a nurse, maybe another doctor or a person from the hospital, to attend the meeting, have time for the meeting. You must not, it should be an undisturbed meeting. Switch off your mobile phones. You should be giving undivided attention to the patient and his family. Be sympathetic, be courteous, be straightforward, be empathetic. You may apologize personally. There is no need to blame yourself or to blame a particular person. You may apologize for the error that has happened, but there is no need to inflict blame on yourself or the individual. And you should promise an investigation into whatever has happened. It is important also for legal purposes and otherwise to record this meeting, have notes of it, see what all has been done, and actually have a documentation of this meeting so that subsequently there is no confusion as to what has actually occurred. Having said all this, you can be sure that errors will be committed, errors will continue to happen, and therefore the best way to help out this sort of situation is to prevent them. And the best thing one could propose for that would be to develop a team culture. Train, and train more. There is no end to training. There is no end to how much efficiency and proficiency you can try to achieve. Strive to remain updated. Try to have a regular outcome assessment of your ICU. Develop a system for reporting errors. Now mind you that error reporting can be voluntary, anonymous. Error reporting can be mandatory, where every error is put down. So you have to develop your own system of error reporting. And lastly, develop checklists for procedures and protocols for different situations. I'll dwell for one more minute on this. I don't know how many of you have read this book. Any raise of hands? Anybody who's read this book or heard of this man? Okay. Now, this is an Indian surgeon who works in the US, and I would recommend that you read this book. It talks about checklists. It talks about how having simple checklists can actually decrease error rates. To do this, he found that he introduced a surgical checklist in 8 countries all over the world, and Delhi was one of them, where St. Stephen Hospital a study was carried out. As the patient was wheeled into the operation theatre, 5 questions were asked. As the incision was to be given before the surgery was to begin, 5 questions were asked. And at the end, when the patient was being wheeled out of the operation theatre, 5 questions were asked. And these were simple things. The first thing was, each person in the team introduced himself. I am surgeon such and such, going to perform such and such surgery. I anticipate, this sort of thing. How much blood loss am I going to have? I am anesthetist such and such. This is the anesthesia I am going to give. This is the thing. This is the situation. I am going to take one more minute. This is actually my closing slide. And he found that simply introducing the checklist decreased the surgical complication rate by almost 30%. Not only in St. Stephen Hospital and Tanzania, where we are talking of less developed surgical care specialties, but even in the US. So this is important, that if we want to prevent errors, we need to devise new systems, easy systems, by which you can decrease the errors. And then you would not have fatal errors. You would have situations like this. This is the famous photograph of the Airbus which landed on the Hudson River without a single casualty. Mind you, when the captain was asked what saved all these people, he said a checklist. He and the co-pilot used a checklist in the 3 minutes they had to save 157 people. And then you can have an error-free flight. Thank you very much.